I am Tim Bannister. Get the slides up in a moment. I am all that stands between you and your lunch. I'm going to start by talking a bit about who I am, who I work for, which is the Scale Factory. At the Scale Factory, we're a cloud DevOps consultancy business that works with software as a service businesses. We help them make the best use of the cloud. I'm going to give you a bit of an overview of the talk, and then I'm going to ask for questions. Yep, you heard that right. I'm going to get the questions in early. I got this tip from Zachary Sarah-Kalaisen, chair of the Documentation Special Interest Group for Kubernetes. And I want to hear what questions people have, because then I can shape my talk and my demo to match what you want to know. So yeah, I'm Tim Bannister. I'm a consultant at the Scale Factory. I've worked there for, I don't know, over 5 years. And my specialisms, I guess, in that consulting role are containers, Kubernetes, and payment security. I said I'm going to talk about self-service infrastructure on AWS, and I'm going to link that to Kubernetes. I'm going to use an extract, transform, load sample, just to hang that off, really. I needed some kind of example workload that you could think about. And I'll do a demo in a bit after the questions. An extract, transform, load is something that, like, a bunch of you have probably just heard of this and do it all the time, and other people are like, this is jargon I've not seen. So I'm going to quickly explain it. Put your hand up and ask questions in a bit, and I'll tell you more if that's what you need to know. So an extract, transform, load is getting some data from somewhere, doing a thing to it, and then putting it back somewhere else. And it's usually just like the prep work when you're cooking. You've got to cook the meal, but before you do that, you've got to chop up all the onions, and you've got to do the carrots, and you've got to peel the potatoes and things. It's not the thing that you want to do to add value. It is the enabling work. And I'm just using that as a demo. What I want to show is that if you're using Kubernetes for something, I'm going to show you how you can get the cloud infrastructure that your workload needs without leaving Kubernetes. And there'll be questions around that, or at least I certainly hope there will be. So I want to hear what people are thinking about that, what questions people have in their mind. It's going to be self-service. I want to show you how someone who's a developer, maybe they work in one team, and there's lots of different teams doing microservices. Each different team knows what it does. Maybe they have a bit of a relationship with other teams that they work with. But they don't have to collaborate with all of the other teams. And that's where the fast flow idea comes in. If you've got teams that are delivering value, it's best if those teams don't have to go and synchronize and have meetings with other teams to make that value happen. There's a really great book by Skelton and Pace called Team Topologies, and I have nicked or borrowed some of the ideas from that book to frame what I'm talking about here. When I started in IT, it was really common for people to do development work, and then one of two things happened. Either the developer said, right, it's done, deploy it, and a different team took over and tried to work out what would happen. Or that team said, it's done, now I need access to deploy it, and they put a ticket into Jira or something equally fun. And they had to wait for someone else to pick up the ticket, triage the ticket, work on the ticket, close the ticket, reopen it, no, we do need to deploy this, and that kind of thing. So what I'm going to try and show you in this demo is some self-service stuff. And at this point, this is where I'd like to ask questions. Like, what questions do you have before I show you what's going on? I'm going to use Kubernetes. It's going to be self-service. This is your time to ask some questions now, and I'll try and make sure that I answer those for you. Any questions at this point? I see one. It'll be on the tape if you use the mic.
I guess with anything self-serve, cost, especially when you're getting into Kubernetes and maybe the nodes, and actually, so maybe not the things they're deploying, but the room for things that they're deploying, so nodes and anything around that.
Okay, so your question is about the infrastructure cost of what I'm going to do.
Yeah.
Okay, cool. What I'm going to do, by the way, I'm going to hear these questions, I'm going to make a note and clarify them, and then I'm going to try and cover them in the talk. Any more questions at this point?
When you say self-service, do the people who are requesting that self-service need to know anything about Kubernetes or the underlying infrastructure?
Okay.
Or is it a case of like a declarative language that you just say, I want this, go away and do it? Is that what this is going to be, or is it more complex than that?
Great, I can definitely, if I don't answer that in the demo, then I've done it completely wrong. I've aimed wrong. Okay, that's a great question. So you're going to find out whether this is for people who know Kubernetes and are doing something self-service, or maybe it's a self-service way to get Kubernetes. Sure. Another question, like we can stop here or carry on. I will have another opportunity to do questions, by the way, so it's not like you have to get them all in now.
With the self-service model, is there a good way to allow customization by different kind of teams and groups without losing the standardization and good principles and practices?
Okay. So it's standardization versus customization. So this kind of model, and I haven't seen exactly what I'm going to show you working. This is a fictional scenario, but this kind of model, I will tell you now, can work for organizations where every team has to follow the same pattern, but it can also work for teams where teams follow a really different pattern. And I'll try and explain that when it fits. Cool. So now I have to go, there we are, that's the window I want to get rid of. So I want to lose that window and cool, drop that away for a second. I'm going to do a demo. So what I want to show you is, it's like I'm going to show you the ETL stuff now. I'm going to show you what I'm trying to do. I've got some data. It's from the police. You can really go and get this data. And let's say that my team at the Acme Facilities Limited used to go and get this police data and do a thing with it, and then the value can start. This is the onion chopping and the potato peeling. But I need to make it happen. With me so far? I hope so. So I've got a shell here. Let me find where that went. Cool. I'm going to use this, and I'm going to think about what I'm going to do. I know I've got a URL of something. I'm going to do some code. I'm going to write a script to fetch like a CSV file. No, it's a zip file. I think it's a zip file. Let me check. So this is where I go and get the URL of the police thing that I'm going to download. I do not have my big 4K monitor, and I'm missing it. Anyway, cool. So I could download that zip file onto my computer. I'm going to use curl. And will that paste in? Yeah, cool. So I know that I want to start by getting the end of year 2016 data from the police. So if the Wi-Fi is working, that should start downloading. Cool. 43 minutes left. I've got a 40-minute talk. Let me see if I can do that another way. Maybe I can use this cloud thing we've got at my company. And there's lots of ways to use this paradigm around fast flow. I'm talking about two things here. One is having the value that people deliver be delivered within a team and offer self-service ways for that team not to have to fill in those JIRA tickets. And then the other bit of the talk is, if you happen to have a Kubernetes setup, here's a Kubernetes example of what that can look like. So the tech is Kubernetes. And then the general principle, like this works for other technologies as well. Cool, so let's quickly write up some script. Here's one I prepared earlier. So I'm going to make this, I'm going to take a year, I'm going to work out a path, I'm going to do some curl fetching, I need to stick it in a bucket. And here's my first problem. Well, I haven't got a bucket. And do I need to fill in a Jira ticket? So I've got a few options here. I can go into the AWS Web Console, so I can totally do that. So if I fire up the Web Console, I can go in, and I can click into that, and I can find the S3 service. This does not show onto my other screen, so I have to look over here. And I can go and do that. It's ClickOps. But now I'm not doing infrastructure as code. I'm not coding. I'm clicking around the console. And that might be OK for a thing that I do once, but it's not repeatable, it's not testable, it's not reviewable. All of the problems that people have with ClickOps. So where have we gone? What are my other options if I don't do that? I've got a Kubernetes cluster. So I've got a demo namespace, and it's got nothing running in it. So I could make a Docker file, right? I could build my code into a container image, and then I could push that into the cloud. I could run it there. Cool. OK, so I guess a lot of you have seen a Docker file. If not, this is the most common way to tell your computer how to build a container image. There are other ones which are equally valid. This syntax is kind of horrible, but it's also like the market leader in horrible syntax for building containers. And so what this is going to do if I run this, it's going to make me a container. So I use Podman. What did I call this image? OK, I can build a container image. And just to save a bit of time, I'm going to make the script a bit better. Here's one I prepared earlier with some more stuff in it. And I'm going to make the Docker file better as well. OK. I've made it, assume like some development has happened. I've decided that I'm going to fetch the data in parallel. I'm going to ungzip it. And I've got the S3 command tools that I actually need to upload to S3. So now what this will all do, I can build that container. What's happening here is that I'm building some software that I could actually run. So if I try and run that on my laptop, not with that brackets in it, I won't. OK, cool. It's defaulted to the year 2016, it's fetching December data. I've got less than 40 minutes left on my talk now, and it's still really slow. So what I want to do is push this to a container image repository. Now, unfortunately, my company doesn't let me use Docker Hub, and it doesn't let me use Key. We're supposed to use Elastic Container Registry. So Elastic Container Registry is Amazon Web Services managed container storage. It's probably backed by S3. It's all managed, so you don't have to really care about that. And this is probably a point to ask if anyone's got more questions, that like they've seen what I'm doing and they're thinking, OK, you've got an idea of what the task is. I need to do some ETL stuff. I'm going to run it in the cloud. Any questions at this point? I don't mind skipping if no one's got one. Yeah, go ahead. One microphone winging its way to you. 1 second.
Why at this point do you decide that you're going to use a Kubernetes cluster, not Fargate or ECS or some other technology?
Cool. So that's a reasonable question. And I think it depends on like what your business context is. So I have seen companies where like the people who are most into containers and orchestration are the data team, the analytics team, the people who might do work like this. I don't know what they're going to do with this police data. Maybe they're going to analyze which postcodes are the best ones to move to for crime or which days are the best days to go mugging, but they're doing analytics. I've worked at other companies where the data team are like, we're all serverless, you know, we don't have any containers, it's all Lambdas. Other places, like there's so many different AWS tools you could do this with. There's data pipeline, there's Glue, there's strange things with Kinesis, there's EMR. And all of those are fine, right? I'm not particularly in the business of going to tell people that the stuff that they're already doing well is wrong and they should switch. Although I am in the business of telling stuff that they're doing badly and is horribly secure is wrong and they should switch. But there's lots of good ways to do it. I'm using Kubernetes as an example and also to show you some of the tech that is going to work with. So where did I put my notes about questions? So the reason that people need to know about Kubernetes to do this is because that's the approach I'm going to show. I'm going to run this in Kubernetes because let's say this data team are used to running their stuff in Kubernetes. They might want fancy GPU stuff that's not available in SageMaker. They might just have come that way. It doesn't really matter. And if you want to do this another way, fine, but this is not the talk for you. Does that reasonably answer your question for the moment? Cool. Okay, so my problem is where do I push this to? And this is where, why don't I create a container registry, repository? So I can do this. So this is where I introduce AWS controllers for Kubernetes. I'm going to define here a container repository in the cloud, which is where I'm going to stick the image. And when I create this, because the cluster is set up for that, like that, the EKS doesn't come with this, but this cluster that I've set up will work. So I can kubectl apply -f manifest /container, and it'll ask me for an MFA code. Which is fine. Cool. So kubectl, for people who are completely new to Kubernetes, is the main command line client for the API. Behind the scenes, this is all HTTP with a sort of strongly consistent pattern for what's happening. But for a client on the command line, you run this tool and it does things for you. So I've taken this, this YAML document here, which is a statement of intent, and I've sent it to Kubernetes. And then inside Kubernetes, some control software has decided the thing to do with that is to, well, let's see, let's kubectl describe repositories, what did I call it? Police data analytics. Cool. So this status bit tells me what's happened. And it's a bit techy to read, but essentially it says, yeah, that worked. You've got a container repository. And I could pop into the AWS console and I could look. And I can also try and push there, right? So I can what did I call that? I called it comps undem latest. So now I need to do a tag. A bit like that. So let's say it's the 22nd and it's 13/30/17. Okay. And I'm going to try pushing it. This AWS Vault tool I'm using gives me credentials for when I'm pushing. If you've got a different tool that does single sign-on, you can use that. It's not a big deal. 13, 30, 17. And I'm doing this on the command line. But if you set up your CI/CD system to do this for you, that would be fine. In fact, I'd probably recommend it. But it looks boring in a demo if I click one button and go, there you are, bye. So, what have I done wrong there? Okay, 403 forbidden. So the thing is that I've defined a repository, but I haven't actually set any access rules on it. But I can, right? Here, I hope, is one I prepared earlier. So what I've done here is that I've edited this manifest. This would go in source control if I wanted it to. There's a few other options. And I've set it to scan my images for security, mark them as being overwritable rather than mutable images. I prefer not to do that in production. And I'm setting a policy on the repository. And I suspect because I recognize that that doesn't look like the right policy that I thought I rehearsed with, that's not going to work, but I can fix that. Cool. I am just going to fix that out of shot because it's going to be boring if I do it all like looking over there. I'm able to use this Kubernetes system to set this all up, even if the demo goes slightly wrong sometimes. If people have questions at this point, it's a great chance for people to try and ask those questions, and I'll try and answer them once I've heard them. Any questions? Oh, could you wait for the mic so that it goes on the recording?
You might get answer this, but you mentioned you created an ECR there, so where's the state with this now? Where's the state stored for this resource?
Okay, where's the state? Yeah, well, essentially the state is the cloud. So if you were writing the software, if you were writing the ACK implementation of this, and you wanted to find out what the true state was, you'd go and call ECR APIs to find out. And that software, I can show you, builds a bit of a cache of it. So this is served from cache, but it's not, it's a bit like a Terraform state file in that it's not the official thing, it is a last seen thing. The difference with Terraform state is that this is much more disposable, that it doesn't really need, oh yeah, invalid policy text. Okay, so this has all gone wrong. But I will fix that. I will need to fix that for my demo, unfortunately. apologies for the... Also, in the console where I'm trying to fix that, I'm logged in as a developer. So I'll come to this. I hope I get time to come to this. The developer role isn't privileged. I'm doing this as an unprivileged, as a less privileged role, which is it's typical, right? Because there was a question about balancing compliance and consistency against letting teams do what they want, and companies have their own way of doing it. But one common thing is to not let people have an AWS account where they are just like, you have full administrator access, do what you like. Because that also includes things like turn off our security controls, or it might do. And so in this demo, I haven't got that full access. Now I just need to apologize for the boring bit while I do this. Cool. Did I get that right? IAM is eventually consistent, so you don't. How annoying. Let me move on to the next bit. This is why live demos add a bit of jeopardy. So I'm going to need some more things. I'm going to need a bucket. So I can use this, and it's self-service. I don't have to talk to another team, no Jira ticket. I can get that bucket configured. Ooh, that's annoying. That was the wrong keyboard button. kubectl describe. Okay, so I've got a bucket, and this is showing that bucket just got created. I didn't have to put much text. If you don't like YAML, this is not for you, but it's pretty easy to do, and it's kind of instant. I'm not having to switch into the AWS console, and I can put this in code. This YAML is declarative code that I can commit, I can put into my repository, I can, I can do that, I can add it and commit it and so on. I think that's all good. Questions about this at this point? Yeah, any questions right now where you've sort of seen what I'm talking about with the Kubernetes side? Maybe want to relate it to the fast flow question. Cool. So I'm going to go back to a question about cost. So I had a question about cost. If you've got a Kubernetes cluster already there, the infrastructure you add this way costs kind of whatever it does. If you add a database and it's a big chunky one, it costs a lot of money. If you've got a bucket, like that bucket doesn't cost anything because it's got nothing stored in it, it's free. I've been able to store several bytes of bucket name at no cost. The EKS cluster that I'm using, that could be completely serverless with Fargate compute. But to have an EKS cluster, you are looking at 10 cents an hour for the control plane. And you are looking at probably another 40 cents an hour to have like a cluster with facilities. I've only got access to one namespace, so I don't even have access to list namespaces, although I can switch context. Okay, so there's a bunch of namespaces here. My developer only has access to the demo namespace. So this is the right fit for companies where different teams are isolated between each other, not with like strong, we don't trust you at all, you might try and attack us isolation, but we just kind of keep you apart. And the reason to keep people apart there is not lack of trust, it is to let people do that fast flow, where team A does their value stream and team B looks after their value stream, and they have coffee with each other, but they don't have Jira tickets with each other, you know? And if you cut down on that need to email, book meetings, and so on, that is what enables the fast flow. And the Kubernetes side of it is probably the less important takeaway from this, if that's new to you. If you're working somewhere where you see those Jira tickets and you're thinking, I wish for this, then that is the message I want to tell you. But I also want to show you that you can have this stuff with Kubernetes. So I did a bucket. Let's make that a bit better. I prepared one earlier. So what I've added here is a block, public access block. That's a control on S3 that all buckets should have, or you can set it account-wide. I've set some server-side encryption. I've set bucket owner preferred ownership controls, and I've added a policy. Now I've jumped ahead a bit because here I've added the IAM role, and I'm going to need an IAM role. Let me show you the final bit. So I'm going to need a job object to do my extract, transform, load. And if you did put this into source control, you don't just create these and leave it. Jobs are a bit different from the other objects I've shown you, like buckets and ECRs and things like deployments, stateful sets of Kubernetes. A job in Kubernetes is a thing that stops. You've finished with it. And so you need to have a bit of code that runs it. Common thing to use is a cron job, which I'm going to guess a lot of you know what those are. Kubernetes has a cron job API, which kind of does what it says on the tin. But for now, I'm just going to define one job. And bit of fiddling around later. Let's make that use the container image that, okay, I didn't actually get to push, and I know IAM is push for time. But what I've defined here is a job that's going to use that actual push container image, and it's going to do a few more things. It's going to get the data process from this annotation here, a little bit of a Kubernetes trick to make that happen, and it's going to give itself 10 gig of local storage, so it can process it. And the final bit that I need is a way to give that pod, that job, like access to S3 and so on. And you do that, the couple of ways to do that. You could make an IAM user and hard code the access key, put the access key for that user in a Kubernetes secret. But I like to use roles. And so I defined that this is the role I'm going to use. It's going to be called comsum demo S3 access. And I've defined in the worker I've defined that I'm going to run this worker as a service account called bucket access. And so the people who use Kubernetes a lot, especially EKS, in their day jobs will know exactly what the technology I'm going to use to join these together, and everyone else will be like, okay, there must be a thing. It's called IAM roles for service accounts. And that's the last bit of the puzzle I want to show you. So first of all, I need a service account. If I create this service account, that gives the pod in Kubernetes a workflow identity. It allows that code to then say, I'd like to become this IAM role. And that's great. because now your code can do whatever you've given that IAM role position to do. If you want more self-service, you can give that code permission to log into your database using RDS IAM integration. You can give that code permission to provision your database or to trigger a backup of your Dynamo. You can let that code do things in AWS. And the other thing that you need is a role. And you can define that in Kubernetes, so it's self-service. Two things that I think make this a good fit for the niche where it's right. And the first one is it's infrastructure as code. And the second one is you haven't had to swap out and do a bit of Terraform or CloudFormation or whatever. Now, I like Terraform quite a lot. And let's not speak about the other one too much. But Terraform is great. And I use this demo, I made Terraform to put up the EKS cluster. But it's a switch. And it's not a switch where you have to talk to a different team, but it might be a switch where you have to go and get advice from a different team. Because there are loads of really good data scientists, you know, R and Python and a whole bunch of stuff and loads of maths. And then asking those data scientists to also learn about Terraform and Kubernetes and containers, it's too much tech. And remember, we're only doing the ETL here. So just as a trivial example of something to do, if this data team were really going to go on and then do their thing, which, you know, that half-day long compute job across loads of nodes that does something clever with all these data when you uncompress them, great, they can do that in Kubernetes, and I'm happy for them. What I don't want to have to do is force them to learn CloudFormation to get the roles that they need. And because because I like committing code and having it reviewed, I don't want to tell them that the right way to do it is to put all those roles by going and clicking the console, because that's not reviewable, it might be irrelevant. So I can create this. Let me do that. You're probably guessing how this looks because it applies. Cool. I suspect we're pretty close to time. I'm happy to take questions if there is room for it. Cool, thanks, Phil.
I'm nicking James's job now, so I'll do a quick walk around and do some questions. And then I know that a lot of people, we are losing people to lunch and the smells of wafting in. So,
can I suggest something then? I will stick around for people like,
we'll definitely do that. Definitely do that. However, we've staggered the two rooms so that there isn't a deluge of people that go out there. So we do definitely have time for questions, Tim.
Cool.
Who's got a question for Tim?
Great.
Excellent.
So you mentioned Helm at the beginning when you started, and then you mentioned Manifest a few times. Are they the same? Are they different? Cool.
So there are lots of different ways with ending up with things in the Kubernetes API. So I'm going to show you. I'm going to create that job, actually. All of these things go into an API. My mental model for it is it's a great big whiteboard, you know, that people are going along and putting information on with a marker pen. And the whiteboard is the Kubernetes API. You've got one of those for your cluster. You can divide it into namespaces, which is like putting a line on the whiteboard and saying, this is for the demo team, this is for the Acme team, whatever. But it's still one whiteboard. How you get those things onto the whiteboard is important to you when you're writing your code, but not at all important to everyone else. So if you use Helm to get the things in the API, to get information on the whiteboard, great. If you use Customize, fine. If you write your own Python code that writes directly to the API using HTTP, that's fine too. And a lot of teams that use Kubernetes value the fact that you can mix and match.
Jolly good. Another one. Great. We'll call this the last question and then
Sure. And I'll hang around, like I said, for if anyone's got a few more questions, happy to take those.
There are actually two questions. So the first one, you obviously played here with some custom resource definitions. Where do we install them if you wanted to try them out?
Could you clarify your question? There are custom resource definitions in this cluster, which I can show. What were you asking about that?
Well, where did you install them from if we wanted to try them out ourselves?
Okay, so these are AWS's custom resource definitions.
I guess what I'm asking is for like a link or a page where we can read more about this.
Okay, cool, yes, right. Where can you get the AWS controllers for Kubernetes CRDs from? I want to show everyone who, not everyone will have seen these custom resource definitions. This is a list of all of the APIs that aren't built into Kubernetes that have been added. So there's Carpenter for auto-scaling. There is ENI configs for having a working network. There's Cert Manager for having certificates. And then this ACK technology that I've been sort of showcasing today has a few things. SNS topics, IAM roles, ECR repositories, DB instances, DB parameter groups, and more. So Kubernetes has an API for putting more APIs in. It's incredibly powerful. Let me find the ACK page and stick it on the thing. I would Google it. You could also Bing it if you don't like Google, but AWS controllers for Kubernetes. And there's more on this topic. I think it's right to wrap things up. I'll let you all escape for your lunch. But if people want to talk more about the tech, come and find me. I'm happy to talk to you. Well, just like the lights are pointing here, I won't move far. You come to me. Thanks for listening, folks.
Yeah, thank you.